Well, it wasn't a perfect deal because all the way through, I've never signed a new deal. Signing a piece of paper which updates the deal. I mean, every single deal that I have done, every single renegotiation that I've done, with whether it be with CBS or Sony, has been an extension of the deal that I signed when I was 18 years old, which effectively bound me for, I think it was 10 albums actually altogether. It was 5 and an optional 5, which is, I mean, effectively the whole of my career, I would imagine. I've never been able to sign a piece of paper as a new deal. I've always been trying to update that deal that I did when I was 18. So I've always been held to that part of the deal that I signed when I was 18 years old. The other point I'd like to make is that people throw around the figures, these massive figures and massive amounts of money that I was supposedly given by Sony. Now, I will completely agree that they are massive amounts of money, and I'm fully aware that I'm in a business which pays amazing money. But CBS signed Wham in 1983. Everything that I have been given by Sony, whether it was in 1984, whether it was in 1988, 1990, they have never been giving me anything above the royalties that I had already earned.
That was even true of the £11 million they paid you in 1988?
Exactly. I was paid £11 million. I mean, actually, I didn't realise I'd been paid £11 million. That's come out in the court case. But I was paid a huge amount of money, and I know it's a vast amount of money, in 1988. But I was never given anything that CBS or then Sony had not already collected from the public. They were always in profit with me. No one ever did me a favour and said, "Here, George, here's £11 million. You know, let's see if we make it back." They were always working in the black, as it were.
Well, let's come on to what the judge did say, Justice Parker, in his summing up. In terms of restraint of trade and so on, he said there wasn't restraint of trade, and that maintaining these sort of contracts there was a public interest in. But I guess the thing that's underlying everything that Justice Parker said, and would underlie whatever Sony said if they were here with us right now, is, but anyway, he signed for 8 albums, he got advances for 8 albums, he's stuck with 8 albums.
Yeah. Well, first, I would have to say the advances, I've already made my argument on that. And secondly, yes, I signed that contract, and I understand the premise of sanctity of contract, but it's such a ridiculous situation. Firstly, you are almost always signing people in a very vulnerable position. I mean, I definitely was in a very vulnerable position.
On the first contract at the age of 18.
Exactly, I was at the age of 18, and many bands are signed that young. Some are signed a little older, but whenever they're signed, they're desperate. Whenever they're signed, they think it's going to be their only chance, you know. But more importantly than the balance of that situation, which is very unfair, is the fact that there isn't one other industry that operates on this basis. If I were an author and I fell out with my record company in the way that I have, the worst I would have to endure was the fact that that they would have the first option on my next book. So you're talking about 2 books. It's a ridiculous situation to sign a contract when you're 18 years old and be held to it for your entire professional career. Why would any court uphold that situation? The judge seems to have found in my case that I reaffirmed this contract at the given points of my renegotiations. But did I really have any choice? The choice that I had was to go along with that length of term, or to do what I've done now, which has been an incredibly difficult process.
The abiding fact, obviously, for the judge was that you had voluntarily and with expert advice signed these contracts.
Are you talking about the first contract?
Well,
or
all
the
through,
renegotiation?
really, he seems
all
to
through,
think.
yes. I mean,
that on the one hand, we see your quandary, in other words. But I mean, for him, the abiding fact was, and I guess for many people, was that you did sign them. On balance, you decided it was better to sign them than not. And that's why you're left with the consequences.
I think that's a very, very odd position to take. I think that, in all honesty, I think that there is more to consider in this case than my situation. I mean, from my point of view, I really do not expect the public to have any great sympathy for a man who's very wealthy. You know, I'm in good health, I'm very wealthy, and I have a lot of public support. And I completely accept that. I'm not looking for public sympathy. I just don't believe that if you are wealthy, that your principles are supposed to be null and void, that you're not supposed to fight for your principles. And my principle in this action is that, just like every other artist in the music industry, I am bound to a very old contract. And that what happens when you are bound to those kind of contracts is that you have that the other party, namely the record company, has an unfair amount of power over your life. The trouble is that it's not that this business for the artist is not like working in an office or working for any company. If you really fall out with the people who control your professional life, you have a right to walk away. Most people, in whatever situation in life, in whatever job, they have a right to say, if you don't want me anymore, if you don't want to work with me anymore, if you don't like the way I work, well, sod you, I'm going somewhere else. I may take a smaller wage packet. I may have to work somewhere I don't like as much as this building. I may have to do all kinds of things I don't want to do, but I'm free to do it. I mean, that is the right, I think that is the right of every individual. And the music industry takes away that right from every artist it signs.
Let's move on then to exploitation, which was another division of the thing. And the judge decided that the right to refrain from exploiting, which Sony have, it was unreal to suggest that Sony would fail to exploit sensibly, because they're in it for the money as well. And of course they wouldn't fail to promote your records deliberately.
Well, I found eventually that to be the total opposite of the case. And it got to the stage where, firstly, for the first time in my career, Sony in the US was refusing to release the singles that I wanted in the succession that I wanted. And I've always had a very clear idea of how, you know, which order singles should be released. And secondly, eventually, once the album was effectively dead in the US, even though it was still selling around the world, they just said, well, we don't want to release any more singles. To me, that's deliberately not exploiting my material. I can't see how else I can put it.
With the way the relationship was deteriorating, maybe you should have said to them, do not, under any circumstance, release this single.
Exactly.
And they'd have done it tomorrow.
A bit of reverse psychology.
Anyway, that's too late now.
Could have worked.
Remuneration was part C. He said that it was not seriously inequitable, an apportionment of net remuneration between George Michael and Sony. It was just a renegotiation, and okay, Sony got a lot more out of it than George Michael did, but you can't really say what a fair remuneration is. It was always going to be that the company who put up the original dosh was going to get more of the cake.
All artists have accepted for years and years that they get a considerably small piece of the pie, considering that they are the raw product and people go out and buy what they give. But I have to be honest, it's never been a big problem for me. Being paid less than other artists has always been a problem for me in terms of pride. In terms of the money I was making, I'm lucky enough to be one of the people that sells enough records that I don't care. I mean, I have a very good lifestyle. I'm very wealthy. I would also have to add, I'm nowhere near as wealthy as the tabloid press would let you believe, but I'm perfectly happy with the money I've got. And
they say 80 million pounds.
They say 80 million. Let's just say let's just call it a fraction. All right, but it's still
Is the
plenty.
fraction more than a half, between a half and 2/3?
I'm not telling you that. I wouldn't tell the court that. I'm not going to tell you that. But let me put it this way. I think I've got something to complain about simply because in principle it's wrong. The end result is that I'm still a very wealthy man. So really I can understand people thinking he should shut his mouth. But the principle is wrong, and this case has decided, or it's not over yet. I mean, I emphasise it's not over yet, but this case will decide the future of all artists in my position.
And in terms of the money, as at this stage, how much does it cost, this case, in fact?
Are you talking about on my side, or
yeah,
the whole
and if
thing?
you have to pay theirs as well?
Well, let's put it this way. On my side, I think it's probably somewhere around the 3 million mark. And if I have to pay, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'm keeping everything crossed that I don't have to pay their side as well, because no one pays until the appeal is heard. But I suppose it's going to be the whole case has got to be in the region of 6 to 7 million. I mean, that's another thing which is ludicrous. I don't understand how the legal system works that way. And luckily, even though it does take a very large chunk out of my earnings for the last 10, 12 years, luckily I can afford it. But again, I can afford it, but how many people could have done this? You know, how many artists can afford to throw away that much time and that much money to get their freedom?
As you went away from the court, what were your thoughts about the judge and justice and the verdict so far?
I can't make any. I really can make no. I've got no way of assessing the judge. I don't know anything about the judge. The judgment itself, I thought, was bizarre. I thought it was a very, very strange judgment. The judge was kind enough to point out that he found that I was very honest, and that he believed I was very honest and candid in the witness box, that I did my best to be truthful. And at the same time, he completely accepted everybody on Sony's side, everybody that appeared in defense of Sony, he completely accepted that they were all telling the truth. Now, if they were all telling the truth about the events that happened between 1990 and the time that this the writ was served for this case, then why was I not lying? Somebody was lying. There were many, many accounts that I gave, which the witnesses for Sony records strongly denied. There were all kinds of things that I told the judge happened, as I remembered them, that Sony denied, that executives at Sony denied. Now, if I was telling the truth, and Sony were telling the truth, then I mean, I just don't understand how he arrived at that decision. Someone was lying. I mean, I know it wasn't me, but the judge made a point of saying that he thought I was telling the truth. But then he said that he thought all the Sony executives were telling the truth. It doesn't add up. It didn't make any sense to me. It didn't make any sense whatsoever.
And so what happens now, then?
Well, what happens now is that we go to appeal. I can't see any other way around it. You know, people have asked me if Sony were to come to you now and say, okay, we've won our case. I mean, the ultimate truth is Sony didn't need me to begin with. Sony as a corporation is so massive, and even as a record company is so massive, that they can do without George Michael perfectly easily. The UK company would miss me. The company as a whole would not miss me, okay? Because it has so many major artists. What they did need to do with this court case was hold on to their standard contract. With this judgment, they've managed to do that. They can only lose by going to appeal. They can't gain anything more. The judgment was so one-sided, they have nothing to gain. Of course, I have everything to gain, because I believe that the appeal is going to be overturned. And I have to believe that 3 minds, because the Court of Appeal consists of 3 judges, I have to believe that 3 minds will get a better grasp of the overall picture of what this case meant, and will want to, you know, when I said professional slavery, I did not mean me per se. I mean, because again, yeah, I'm a very well-paid slave, you know, I mean, and I take that point completely. But as I've said, I'm one of the lucky ones. I cannot believe that the Court of Appeal is not going to say, okay, this is one industry which has been getting away with the kind of stuff that the film industry and the sports industry and the publishing industry and just about every other industry has had to address. You know, the right of the individual, the freedom of the individual has been obtained in just about every other industry. This is one industry that's lagging behind. We're going to pull it up. I mean, I'm sure that's what most of the record industry expected to happen. I believe that is what will happen in the Court of Appeal. Now, I am confident that I can go forward. I believe ultimately that is the strongest possibility. If Sony were to come to me at this stage and say, okay, George, we've made our point, you can go, we don't really need you, you can go, you can continue your career elsewhere, and we'll you know, we don't want this mess to continue. I have to be honest, if they were going to do that unconditionally, I'd have to say, okay, I'm not going to be a martyr. I have my own life to think about, and I can't fight for the whole industry at the risk of losing the rest of the next 10 years of my life as an artist. And I would probably accept that, but I think that is so unlikely.
Well, they mightn't they say roughly what you've said? It might give you a free discharge, but they'd probably want to charge a transfer fee. That would be all right, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have to pay the transfer fee. Warner's or whoever it was would have to pay that.
Yeah, but then ultimately I wouldn't be able to. But then ultimately I would probably end up in the same financial position at another place. I mean, I don't know. I would have to know. It's hard to say theoretically on what conditions I would not take this to the Court of Appeal. Suffice to say that I do not think that the conditions that I would need, considering what I've given up in the last 2 years, I don't believe that Sony will come to that they will meet me at that point. If they were that reasonable, this would never have got to court in the first place. If they'd been reasonable in the first place, and because I went to them and said, look, I don't want to tell the world this is going on. I don't need to tell the world this is going on. Please, let me go. I've been with you for 10 years. I've made you hundreds of millions of dollars, and people will believe that the deal is over. You know, I've been here for this long. They wouldn't accept that. They wouldn't come close to accepting that. I have no real reason to believe that they'll be reasonable before the Court of Appeal. So I think that ultimately, I think it's going to end up in the Court of Appeal. It's not what I want, but I think that's where it's going to be.
How long will it take to get to the Court of Appeal, do you think?
I'm not sure. Hopefully it will be sometime. I mean, it's still a long way away. It's hopefully be early next year.
What about if instead of saying, we'll release you, George, but we want a transfer fee of $10 million from your new record company or whatever. What about if they said, George, we'll release you, absolutely, we're not going to even ask for a transfer fee, as long as, just as a parting gift, you give us one final album?
I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. That would be risking a year's work, because it takes me a year on average to make an album. That would be entrusting another year's work and another year of my life to the same record executives who already bear a very, very large grudge against me. So it would be madness. When I make a piece of work, I have to feel that everyone is going to get the chance to hear it. And with another album for Sony, I don't know that it would mean that. So I just don't think I could make that album.
So that in fact, I mean, obviously the appeal, you could win the appeal, but an agreement between the two of you of some kind before that appeal. Otherwise, if you were to lose the appeal, I mean, there is a situation there, because you're standing firm against any more albums for Sony, where that's where the no more albums from George Michael till 2004 comes in, isn't it? That's the end game of this, isn't it?
I mean, I'm trying not to look beyond the possibility of the appeal. I mean, of course, there is the ultimate option of an appeal at the House of Lords, which would take forever. And I really can't look any further than the Court of Appeal. All I know is, in this situation, I can only move up from that position. I mean, I've lost everything in terms of what I tried to achieve with this action. And I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist, and it's the only way I can get through to next year and not crumble under it. I have to believe that this judge was wrong. That he saw it the way he wanted to see it, and that 3 judges will make a decision next year that will be in my favour. I mean, I have to believe that.